Hey everyone. Tonight we're stepping deep into the shadows of Star Wars to uncover one of the galaxy's most chilling secrets. The kind of truth that has been buried in the tombs of Korriban for over 5,000 years, where the bones of emperors lie scattered like broken promises, and the whispers of ancient power still echo through crimson stone corridors. This isn't just another tale of Sith betrayal or the familiar story of apprentices striking down their masters. Tonight we're diving into something far more sinister, something that reveals why every single Sith Emperor, from the ancient Dark Lords of Korriban to Palpatine himself, was destined to fall before they ever claimed their throne. It's a story of puppet strings pulled by invisible hands, of sacrificial kings who believed they ruled while dancing to a rhythm older than the Republic itself. Before we begin this journey into the heart of darkness, take a moment to hit that like button if you're ready for tonight's descent into forbidden knowledge. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy these deep explorations into the galaxy's hidden truths, and drop a comment, letting me know what corner of the world you're listening from. I love seeing our community of lore seekers come together from across the stars. Now, get comfortable. Maybe dim those lights, settle into your favorite spot, and prepare yourself for a revelation that will change how you see every Sith Emperor who ever lived. Let's begin tonight's journey together. In the depths of Korriban's Valley of the Dark Lords, where the wind carries the screams of 10,000 years, archaeologists discovered something that should never have seen daylight. Hidden beneath the collapsed tomb of Darth Nd, sealed behind walls inscribed with warnings in a dozen dead languages, they found a holocron that pulsed with malevolent energy. When activated, it spoke with the voice of someone who claimed to have witnessed the rise and fall of every Sith Emperor since the Dark Beginning. The holocron's first words chilled even the most hardened dark-side scholars to their core. It said, "You believe you understand power, but you have seen only shadows dancing on the wall. Every emperor you revere, every dark lord you fear, every Sith who claimed dominion over stars and souls, they were never rulers. They were offerings. Sacrifices upon an altar so ancient that its purpose has been forgotten by history itself." But that wasn't the most disturbing revelation contained within that cursed artifact. The holocron claimed that the pattern wasn't random. Each emperor's rise, their moment of supreme triumph, and their inevitable, brutal downfall, all of it followed a precise design. A design so perfect, so methodical, that it had been repeating itself for millennia without a single soul recognizing the truth. The gatekeeper of this forbidden knowledge spoke of Vitiate, the Sith Emperor, who ruled for over 1,000 years, who consumed entire worlds and commanded the loyalty of billions. Even he, in all his terrible glory, was merely playing a role written for him by forces he never suspected existed. When he fell, it wasn't because his enemies were stronger, or because his own darkness consumed him. He fell because it was time, because the cycle demanded it. Because somewhere in the shadows, ancient architects of power were ready for the next act in their eternal play. But Vitiate was just one note in a symphony of destruction that stretches back to the very first Sith who ever claimed the title of Emperor. The holocron spoke of Marka Ragnos, whose golden age ended not in defeat but in a carefully orchestrated transition of power. It whispered of Naga Sato, whose ambitions led him exactly where unseen hands wanted him to go. It revealed the truth about Frida Nod, about Exar Kun, about every Dark Lord who thought they were writing their own destiny while following a script written in blood and shadow. And then it spoke of Palpatine, the Emperor who brought the Sith back from the edge of extinction, who ruled the galaxy with an iron fist for decades, who seemed to have broken every pattern that came before him. But the holocron laughed, a sound like breaking glass in a tomb, and said that Palpatine too was exactly where he was meant to be. That his rise and fall, his manipulation of the Skywalkers, even his return from death itself, all of it served a purpose greater than galactic domination. The most chilling revelation was yet to come. As the holocron's crimson light pulsed in that buried chamber, it revealed that the pattern wasn't finished, that even now in what the galaxy believes to be an age of balance and peace, the ancient machinery of succession still turns, still watches, still waits for the next emperor to claim their throne, never knowing that their crown is actually a funeral shroud. Who were these architects of imperial destruction? What purpose could possibly require the systematic rise and fall of the most powerful beings in galactic history? And why did every Sith emperor, no matter how brilliant, how ruthless, how steeped in the dark side, end up as nothing more than another name carved on a crumbling tomb in the Valley of the Dark Lords? The answers lie deeper in Korriban's buried secrets, in chambers where the very stones weep with accumulated anguish, where the truth about power and those who wield it waits to transform everything you thought you knew about the Sith, the Empire, and the eternal dance between order and chaos that has shaped the galaxy's destiny for thousands of years. Tonight we follow that trail of blood and betrayal back to its source. We uncover the truth that the Sith themselves were too blinded by ambition to see, and we discover why the most dangerous revelation in galactic history has been hidden not from the Jedi, not from the Republic, but from the very emperors whose bones now rest in silent testimony to a design so perfect that its architects remain invisible even in death. The holocron's final warning echoes still in that buried chamber on Korriban. It said that knowledge of the pattern changes nothing, that those who learn the truth become part of it, that you cannot break a cycle, you're already trapped within. But perhaps, in the telling of this tale, in the sharing of this forbidden knowledge, we might finally understand what it truly means to rule, and what price the galaxy has paid for the illusion of Sith supremacy. The ancient winds of Korriban howled through the Valley of the Dark Lords. As you stood before the entrance to what had once been the tomb of Darth ended, your boots crunching on sand that had been stained crimson by millennia of dark rituals. The archaeological expedition that discovered the holocron had fled in terror after 3 team members died from what they described as spontaneous combustion. Their bodies found reduced to ash in perfect human silhouettes. Only you remained, drawn by whispers in the Force that spoke of answers to questions you hadn't even known to ask. You are no ordinary historian, born on Dromund Kaos to parents who claimed no knowledge of Force sensitivity in their bloodline. You had always felt the pull of ancient knowledge, the way shadows seemed to whisper secrets when you walked through ruins of the old Sith Empire. Your academic credentials from the University of Coruscant meant nothing here, in this place where learning came not from books, but from the very stones that remembered 10,000 years of suffering and triumph. The holocron sat on a pedestal of black marble veined with what looked like frozen lightning, its crystalline surface pulsing with a heartbeat rhythm that matched your own. When you had first touched it 3 days ago, the visions had nearly driven you to madness. Images of countless figures in dark robes, each bearing the weight of imperial power, each falling in ways that seemed inevitable yet unexpected. But now, after nights of meditation and preparation, you felt ready to truly commune with the ancient intelligence trapped within. Beside you stood your unlikely companion, though companion might be too generous a term. The holocron's gatekeeper had manifested as soon as you proved yourself worthy through trials that left scars both visible and hidden. She appeared as a tall, elegant woman with silver hair and eyes like black stars, her form translucent and shifting like smoke given structure by will alone. She claimed to have been a Sith Lord herself once, though she spoke of her living days as if they belonged to someone else entirely. Her name, she said, was Darth Memoriam, and she had served as the keeper of imperial records for over 2 centuries before her physical death. But her purpose went deeper than simple record-keeping. She had been the witness, the one who watched and remembered while emperors played out their scripted roles. Every conversation with her felt like standing at the edge of an abyss, knowing that one wrong word or thought might send you tumbling into truths that mortal minds were never meant to comprehend. The chamber around you told its own story of forgotten grandeur. Walls of polished obsidian reflected the holocron's crimson light in patterns that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Ancient Sith script covered every surface, written in gold that had never tarnished, despite the millennia that had passed. Some inscriptions you could read, speaking of power and dominion, and the eternal struggle between master and apprentice. But others were in dialects so old that even the holocron's vast database struggled to translate them completely. The air itself felt thick with accumulated dark side energy, pressing against your consciousness like a physical weight. Every breath carried the taste of copper and ozone, the residue of force lightning that had crackled through this chamber countless times. The temperature never varied, holding steady at a point that was neither warm nor cold but somehow both, as if the very concept of comfort had been banished from this place. Through narrow windows cut high in the chamber walls, you could see the valley stretching away into the distance, dotted with the tombs of Sith lords, whose names had once commanded the obedience of star systems. Some pyramids stood proud and intact, their surfaces unmarked by time or weather. Others had collapsed into rubble, their occupants' legacies crumbling along with their eternal resting places. But all of them shared a common feature that had taken you days to notice. They were arranged in a pattern, a vast geometric design that could only be seen from above and only made sense when viewed as a whole. Darth Memoriam had watched you discover this truth with something that might have been amusement flickering in her stellar eyes. When you asked her about the arrangement, she had simply said that the dead were not placed randomly, that every tomb's position served a purpose in a design so vast that living minds could glimpse only fragments of its true scope. The Valley of the Dark Lords was not a cemetery, she explained, but a ritual circle carved into the very surface of Korriban, with each burial adding another layer to a working of the force that had been building for thousands of years. Your academic training had prepared you to analyze historical patterns and cultural significance, but nothing in your education had readied you for the vertigo that came with realizing you were standing at the center of the galaxy's longest-running conspiracy. The holocron pulsed brighter as this understanding crystallized in your mind, and Memoriam's form solidified slightly, as if your growing comprehension somehow fed her existence. She began to speak of the first time she had witnessed an emperor's fall, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in your bones. It had been Darth Vitiate's final defeat at the hands of the hero of Tython, an event she had watched from the shadows with a mixture of sorrow and anticipation. Even then, she said, the pattern had been ancient. Even then, the outcome had been predetermined by forces that made the Emperor himself seem like a child playing with toys he didn't understand. The weight of accumulated years pressed down on this chamber, decades and centuries of secrets, building up like sedimentary layers in stone. You could feel them all around you, the ghosts of conversations between beings whose very names had been erased from galactic history. Memoriam was the last living link to that hidden world, the final witness to truths that others had died to protect or died to discover. As night deepened over Korriban's perpetual twilight landscape, the chamber's atmosphere grew heavier still. The crimson light from the holocron seemed to pulse in rhythm with something vast and patient, something that had been waiting longer than civilizations had existed. You settled into a meditation posture on the cold stone floor, preparing to delve deeper into mysteries that had already begun to change you in ways you couldn't yet comprehend. Memoriam drifted closer, her form becoming more substantial as the boundary between past and present grew thin in this place where time itself seemed negotiable. She raised one translucent hand and gestured toward the holocron, her expression carrying the weight of someone who had watched empires rise and fall like waves against a shore. The real journey was about to begin, and you could feel the galaxy's hidden history, preparing to unfold before you, like a flower blooming in reverse, its petals falling away to reveal the dark truth at its heart. The decision came to you like a whisper from the Force itself, carried on currents of dark energy that had been flowing through this chamber for millennia. As Darth Memoriam's ethereal form solidified in the crimson light of the holocron, you knew there could be no turning back. The academic life you had known, the comfortable certainty of published research and peer review, all of it seemed suddenly trivial compared to the magnitude of what lay hidden in these ancient records. You reached out with both hands and placed your palms against the holocron's crystalline surface. The moment your skin made contact, the galaxy exploded into your consciousness. Visions cascaded through your mind like a waterfall of liquid fire, each image burning itself into your memory. With perfect, terrible clarity, you saw the rise of the first Sith Empire, watched as beings drunk on dark power carve their names across the stars in blood and shadow. But beneath it all, threading through every conquest and every fall, you glimpsed the outline of something else. A pattern, a design, a purpose that stretched beyond individual ambition into realms of meaning that made your spirit recoil even as your mind hungered for understanding. When the visions finally released you, hours had passed without your awareness. Memoriam watched you with those star-filled eyes, her expression unreadable as you struggled to process what you had experienced. Your hands shook as you pulled them back from the holocron, and you realized that the trembling wasn't from fear or exhaustion, it was from anticipation. The taste of forbidden knowledge was intoxicating beyond anything you had imagined, and already you craved more. The quest had chosen you as much as you had chosen it. Every emperor whose reign had ended in betrayal and ruin, every Sith Lord who had believed himself the architect of his own destiny, while dancing to a melody he couldn't hear. All of them were connected by threads of causation so subtle that they had remained invisible for thousands of years. But you would find those threads. You would trace them back to their source, and finally understand why the most powerful beings in galactic history had been reduced to cautionary tales carved on crumbling tombstones. Memoriam gestured toward a section of the chamber wall where the ancient script seemed to writhe and shift in the holocron's light. As you approached, the golden letters rearranged themselves into readable text, revealing fragments of imperial records that had been thought lost forever. Here were the private journals of emperors, their most guarded thoughts preserved in crystalline memory banks that could outlast civilizations. Here were the secret communications between Sith Lords, messages that revealed the true relationships between master and apprentice, ruler and ruled. But the records were incomplete, deliberately so. Crucial passages had been redacted by hands that clearly understood the explosive nature of what they contained. Names had been replaced with symbols that referenced coding systems lost to time. Dates had been altered or removed entirely, creating gaps in the historical narrative that felt intentional rather than accidental. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to obscure the truth while preserving just enough evidence to tantalize future investigators. Your first breakthrough came when you discovered a recurring symbol appearing at key moments in multiple imperial reigns. A simple geometric design that looked like 3 interlocking circles with a 4th circle at their center. It appeared in the margins of documents that described the most pivotal moments in Sith history. The symbol marked the pages that discussed Vitiate's initial conquest of the original Sith Empire. It appeared again in records of Revan's return from the unknown regions. It was present in fragmentary accounts of Palpatine's earliest political machinations on Naboo. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental, but too subtle to have been noticed by previous scholars who had examined these documents individually rather than as part of a larger whole. You spent hours tracing the symbols' appearances, mapping them against the known timeline of galactic history, and what emerged was a constellation of influence that spanned millennia. Every major shift in Sith power, every unexpected alliance or betrayal, every moment when the course of galactic civilization changed direction, all of it clustered around the appearances of that simple four-circle design. Memoriam confirmed your suspicions with a nod that carried the weight of centuries. She had been present during some of those pivotal moments, she explained. Though always in the shadows, always watching rather than participating. The symbol belonged to something she called the Eternal Conclave, a group that existed in the spaces between documented history, pulling strings that connected emperors to outcomes they never saw coming. As you delved deeper into the records, a disturbing truth began to emerge. The emperors weren't failing because they lacked wisdom or power or cunning. They were failing because failure had been built into their rise from the very beginning. Every alliance that seemed to strengthen their position actually created the conditions for their eventual downfall. Every victory that expanded their dominion also extended their vulnerability. Every moment of triumph carried within it the seeds of their destruction. The night passed in a blur of discovery and growing unease. Ancient surveillance recordings revealed conversations between Sith lords who spoke in coded language about preparations for transitions they described as both inevitable and necessary. Financial records showed movements of resources that made no sense in the context of traditional imperial administration but fell into clear patterns when viewed as preparations for systematic governmental collapse. Military reports described training exercises that seemed designed to test not the loyalty of troops to their current emperor, but their ability to adapt quickly to new leadership. The evidence painted a picture that challenged everything you thought you knew about Sith history. These weren't random betrayals driven by the ambitious nature of dark-side practitioners. These were carefully orchestrated successions, managed by an intelligence that viewed individual emperors not as rulers, but as temporary custodians of power that ultimately belonged to someone else entirely. Your academic instincts screamed that such a conspiracy was impossible, that no organization could maintain secrecy and continuity across thousands of years. Through the rise and fall of governments, through wars that reshaped the very geography of the galaxy. But the evidence continued to accumulate with each passing hour, building into a weight of proof that became harder and harder to deny. Memoriam watched your growing comprehension with something that might have been sympathy flickering in her spectral features. She had walked this same path of discovery once, she told you, back when she still possessed flesh and blood, and the comfortable illusions that came with mortality. The truth had changed her in ways that went beyond the mere transition from life to death. It had shown her that power was not what she had believed it to be, that the entire structure of Sith civilization was built on foundations that shifted according to the will of architects whose identities remained hidden even from their most trusted servants. The hour was growing late, but you felt more awake than you had ever been in your life. Each revelation opened new questions that demanded answers. Each answer revealed new mysteries that beckoned from the shadows of ancient knowledge. You were no longer simply researching imperial history. You were tracing the bloodline of conspiracy itself, following its genetic code back through generations of deception to find its ultimate source. The deeper you delved into the ancient records, the more the familiar history of the Sith Empire began to unravel like a tapestry pulled apart thread by thread. What had seemed like straightforward accounts of imperial succession now revealed themselves as carefully constructed narratives, each one designed to obscure rather than illuminate the truth. The holocron's memory banks contained layers upon layers of information, and with each new revelation, you began to understand that you were looking at the greatest deception in galactic history. Darth Memoriam guided you through the labyrinthine data structures, with the patience of someone who had spent eternity organizing the lies of the living. Her translucent fingers passed through the holocron's control interfaces, yet somehow managed to manipulate them with precision that spoke of long practice. As she worked, fragments of suppressed historical records materialized in the air before you, holographic documents that pulsed with their own inner light. The first major discovery came when you uncovered the true records of Darth Krayt's one Sith Empire. Official histories described his rise as the natural evolution of Sith philosophy, a return to ancient traditions after the aberration of the Rule of Two. But the hidden documents told a different story entirely. Krayt's transformation from a Sharate Het into a Sith Lord had not been a gradual corruption by dark side influences. It had been an orchestrated metamorphosis, guided by forces that had been waiting centuries for the right candidate to emerge. The evidence was damning in its precision. Communications between unknown parties discussed Het's psychological profile with clinical detachment, analyzing his strengths and weaknesses, the way a military strategist might evaluate potential battle sites. His exposure to Sith artifacts during his exile was not accidental but carefully arranged, with specific relics placed in his path at precisely calculated moments. Even his discovery of Korriban and the ancient Sith teachings had been stage-managed by hands that remained invisible throughout the entire process. But Krayt was merely the most recent example in a pattern that stretched back through the millennia. As you accessed deeper levels of the holocron's database, more names emerged from the shadows of deliberately obscured history. Emperors you had never heard of. Sith Lords whose reigns had been completely erased from public records. Entire dynasties that had ruled for centuries before vanishing without trace from the official chronologies. Each of these forgotten rulers shared common characteristics that became more apparent as the evidence accumulated. They had all risen to power during periods of apparent chaos, bringing order and stability to regions devastated by war or natural disaster. They had all demonstrated remarkable military and political acumen, uniting fractured territories under unified imperial rule. And they had all fallen at moments when their empires seemed strongest, brought down by combinations of betrayal and misfortune that appeared random but followed disturbingly similar patterns. The most chilling discovery was a series of documents that Memoriam called the Succession Protocols. These were detailed instruction manuals that described how to identify, cultivate, and ultimately eliminate potential emperors. The language was clinical and precise, treating the rise and fall of galactic rulers as a repeatable process that could be managed and controlled like any other industrial operation. The protocols included psychological profiles of successful emperor candidates, tactical analyses of the most effective methods for orchestrating their downfall, and logistical frameworks for transferring power to designated successors. One protocol document contained a passage that made your blood run cold in your veins. It described the ideal emperor as someone who possessed immense personal power but remained fundamentally isolated from any support network that might help them recognize the true nature of their situation. The emperor should be brilliant enough to believe in their own supremacy, ambitious enough to make the difficult decisions required for effective rule, but paranoid enough to eliminate potential allies before they could become genuine threats to the hidden manipulators pulling the strings. As you read these documents, a terrible realization began to form in your mind. Every characteristic described in the protocols matched the known personalities of history's most famous Sith emperors. With uncanny precision, Palpatine's calculated manipulation of the political system, his systematic elimination of the Jedi, his transformation of the Republic into the Empire, all of it aligned perfectly with the behavioral patterns that the protocols were designed to encourage and exploit. But the protocols went beyond simple manipulation. They described a systematic program of genetic and force-based breeding that had been operating for thousands of years. Bloodlines were tracked across generations with obsessive precision. Individuals with specific combinations of force sensitivity and psychological traits were identified in childhood and guided through experiences designed to shape their development in predetermined directions. The entire program was designed to produce emperors who would serve the hidden agenda while believing themselves to be independent actors pursuing their own ambitions. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering in its implications. It suggested that the entire recorded history of Sith civilization was not the product of natural political evolution, but the result of deliberate social engineering on a scale that dwarfed anything attempted by any known government or organization. The Eternal Conclave, as Memoriam called them, had been playing a game that spanned millennia, with entire civilizations serving as pieces on a board whose dimensions were impossible for individual players to comprehend. Your hands trembled as you accessed the final set of documents that Memoriam had prepared for your review. These were the most heavily encrypted files in the Holocron's database, protected by security measures that required specific combinations of force techniques and mathematical calculations to unlock. When the protection finally dissolved, revealing the contents within, you understood why such extreme precautions had been necessary. The documents contained detailed predictions about future imperial successions, complete with names, dates, and methods that stretched centuries into what was, from your perspective, the recent past. The predictions were not vague prophecies or general trend analyses. They were specific operational plans that described exactly how individual emperors would rise to power and exactly how they would be eliminated when their usefulness ended. Most disturbing of all was the accuracy of these ancient predictions. Event after event had unfolded exactly as the documents described, with a precision that suggested either impossible prescience or levels of control that approached omnipotence. The rise of the Galactic Empire, the emergence of the Rebellion, the fall of Palpatine, even the eventual restoration of the Republic. All of it had been anticipated and planned with mechanical precision by minds that viewed galactic civilization as a clockwork mechanism to be wound and adjusted according to their incomprehensible agenda. As dawn broke over Korriban's crimson landscape, painting the Valley of the Dark Lords in shades of gold and shadow, you realized that something fundamental had changed within your understanding of reality itself. The comfortable assumptions that had governed your academic career, your belief in the randomness of historical events and the agency of individual actors, all of it had crumbled beneath the weight of evidence that painted a picture too vast and too terrible to be easily comprehended. But even as your old certainties dissolved, a new hunger began to grow within you. The hunger to know more, to understand the full scope of the deception, to trace the conspiracy back to its ultimate source, and finally confront the architects of 10,000 years of carefully orchestrated imperial failure. The weight of accumulated evidence pressed down upon your consciousness like a physical burden as you sat in the crimson glow of the holocron, trying to process the magnitude of what you had discovered. The succession protocols, the breeding programs, the carefully orchestrated rise and fall of emperors across millennia, all of it painted a picture that your rational mind desperately wanted to reject. Yet the documentation was too comprehensive, too detailed, too internally consistent to dismiss as elaborate fiction or the fantasies of paranoid minds. Darth Memoriam watched your struggle with the patient attention of someone who had witnessed this same internal battle countless times before. Her spectral form drifted closer as you rubbed your temples, trying to ease the pressure that came from holding too many terrible truths simultaneously in your thoughts. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had once stood exactly where you stood now, facing the same choice between comfortable ignorance and unbearable knowledge. The most logical explanation, she suggested, was also the most reassuring one. The Sith Empire had always been characterized by betrayal and internal conflict. Masters murdered by apprentices. Emperors overthrown by ambitious generals. Entire dynasties wiped out in single nights of coordinated violence. This was simply the nature of the dark side, the inevitable consequence of a philosophy that celebrated power above all other virtues. The patterns you had identified were not evidence of conspiracy, but simply the mathematical result of ambitious individuals operating within a system that rewarded treachery and punished trust. As Memoriam outlined this interpretation, you found yourself nodding along with her reasoning. It made perfect sense. Far more sense than the alternative explanation that required you to believe in a shadowy organization that had maintained operational continuity for thousands of years while manipulating the most powerful Force users in galactic history. The Eternal Conclave was probably nothing more than a convenient fiction, a way for Sith historians to impose narrative structure on events that were actually random and chaotic. The genetic tracking programs could be explained as standard genealogical research, the kind of record-keeping that any civilization might maintain to understand its own origins and development. The psychological profiles were likely academic exercises, attempts by Sith scholars to understand what personal characteristics led to successful leadership. The predictions about future emperors were probably general pattern recognition rather than specific operational planning, the natural result of studying historical cycles and projecting them forward into probable futures. Even the succession protocols could be interpreted as contingency planning rather than active conspiracy. Any competent government would develop procedures for managing transitions of power, especially in a system where violent succession was commonplace. The clinical language and systematic approach were simply evidence of bureaucratic efficiency rather than sinister manipulation. Your academic training reasserted itself as you considered this more conventional explanation. The principle of Occam's razor suggested that simpler explanations were generally more accurate than complex ones. A conspiracy involving thousands of participants operating across dozens of worlds over multiple millennia was inherently less probable than the straightforward interpretation that Sith emperors failed because they operated within a system designed to reward the very behaviors that ultimately led to their downfall. The relief that came with accepting this rational explanation was almost overwhelming. The universe returned to a more manageable size, one where individual agency mattered and historical events resulted from comprehensible human motivations rather than incomprehensible long-term planning by invisible puppet masters. You could return to your academic career with interesting new insights into Sith psychology and political structure, perhaps write a few papers on the recurring patterns in imperial succession, maybe even publish a book that would establish your reputation as a serious scholar of ancient history. But even as you embraced this more comfortable interpretation of the evidence, something nagged at your consciousness like a splinter, lodged too deep to extract. The precision of the predictions was difficult to explain away as simple pattern recognition. The specificity of the genetic programs suggested purposes beyond mere genealogical curiosity. The coordination required to place specific artifacts in Krait's path at exactly the right moments implied levels of planning and resource allocation that seemed excessive for academic research projects. Memoriam observed your internal debate with expressions that shifted between sympathy and something that might have been disappointment. When you voiced your acceptance of the conventional explanation, she nodded slowly, but her stellar eyes seemed to dim slightly, as if some essential light had gone out of them. She began to speak of her own experiences during the reign of Vitiate, describing the day-to-day operations of imperial government from the perspective of someone who had access to the highest levels of classified information. Her accounts painted a picture of an empire that functioned with remarkable efficiency, despite the chaotic nature of Sith politics. Resources flowed where they were needed without apparent central coordination. Military units received orders that anticipated enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. Political crises resolve themselves through interventions by parties who seem to appear from nowhere at exactly the right moments to prevent systemic collapse. At the time, Memoriam explained, she had attributed this efficiency to the natural superiority of Sith organizational methods. The dark side granted its practitioners insights that allowed them to see patterns and possibilities that escaped lesser minds. The Empire succeeded because its leaders were simply more capable than the bureaucrats and politicians who ran other galactic governments. But after her death, when she gained access to information that had been classified beyond even her considerable security clearance during life, she began to understand that the efficiency had not emerged from superior Sith capabilities. It had been the result of careful management by entities who remained hidden even from the most trusted Imperial advisors. The Empire had functioned smoothly because its apparent chaos was actually choreographed disorder, designed to create the impression of internal conflict while maintaining operational effectiveness. As Memoriam spoke, you felt the comfortable certainty of your rational explanation beginning to erode once again. The details she provided were too specific, too internally consistent, too verifiable against other historical records, to dismiss as the fantasies of a spirit who had spent too many centuries in isolation. But accepting her account meant returning to the terrifying implications of systematic manipulation on a scale that challenged your fundamental assumptions about how galactic civilization actually functioned. The hours passed as you wrestled with these competing interpretations, weighing the evidence for conspiracy against the psychological comfort of conventional explanations. The holocron pulsed steadily in its crystalline housing, patient and eternal, containing answers to questions you were not sure you wanted to ask. Outside the chamber windows, Korriban's eternal twilight painted the Valley of the Dark Lords in shades of crimson and shadow, a landscape that seemed designed to reflect the moral ambiguity of the choices facing anyone who sought to understand its secrets. By the time you finally made your decision, dawn was breaking over the ancient tombs once again, painting the sky in colors that seemed to echo the conflict between light and darkness that had played out in this place for thousands of years. The choice was ultimately simple, even if its implications were not. You could accept the comfortable lie of random historical patterns, or you could pursue the uncomfortable truth of systematic deception. The hunger for knowledge won, as perhaps it was always destined to do. The decision to pursue the deeper truth changed something fundamental within you, as if crossing an invisible threshold had altered the very fabric of your being. Darth Memoriam's spectral form brightened perceptibly when you voiced your commitment to uncover the full scope of the conspiracy, her stellar eyes reflecting something that might have been relief or perhaps recognition of a kindred spirit willing to sacrifice comfort for understanding. The holocron responded to your renewed determination by revealing access pathways that had remained hidden during your earlier investigations. New chambers of data opened themselves to your exploration, each one containing information that had been classified at levels beyond anything you had previously encountered. These were not simply imperial records or historical documents. These were operational files from the deepest levels of Sith intelligence operations, communications between entities whose very existence had been erased from all official records. Your first glimpse into these forbidden archives revealed the existence of something called the Eternal Cycle, a concept that appeared throughout Sith philosophical texts, but had always been interpreted as abstract metaphysical speculation rather than concrete operational doctrine. The hidden files painted a very different picture. The Eternal Cycle was not philosophy but engineering, a systematic process for managing the flow of power through Sith civilization, according to principles that transcended individual ambition or political convenience. The documentation described the cycle as a method for harvesting and concentrating force energy on a galactic scale, using the rise and fall of emperors as focal points for massive ritual workings that operated across centuries rather than years. Each emperor's reign represented a different phase in the cycle, from the initial gathering of power through its concentration in a single individual to its eventual release through the emperor's death or defeat. The pattern repeated itself with mechanical precision, each iteration building upon the energy accumulated during previous cycles. As you delved deeper into the files, the true scope of the operation began to reveal itself. The Eternal Conclave was not simply a political conspiracy, but something far more ambitious and terrifying. They were Force users who had transcended individual mortality by binding their consciousness to the cycle itself, becoming living embodiments of the process they had created. Their manipulation of imperial succession was not motivated by conventional desires for power or wealth, but by the need to maintain and strengthen the ritual framework that sustained their existence. The chamber around you seemed to respond to your growing understanding, its ancient systems awakening as if recognizing the presence of someone capable of comprehending their true purpose. Hidden panels slid open in the walls, revealing equipment that had lain dormant for millennia. Crystalline arrays that pulsed with their own inner light began to resonate with the holocron's energy field, creating harmonic frequencies that made your bones vibrate in sympathy with forces that operated on frequencies beyond normal human perception. Memoriam guided you through the activation of these ancient systems with reverent care, her translucent fingers dancing over control interfaces that responded to her touch despite her spectral nature. As the chamber's full capabilities came online, you realized that you were not simply examining historical records, but accessing a living system that continued to monitor and influence galactic events in real time. The tomb of Darth Endedu was not a burial site but a monitoring station, one node in a vast network that spanned the galaxy. The revelation that followed challenged every assumption you had made about the nature of death and the boundaries between past and present. The emperors whose falls you had been studying were not truly dead in any conventional sense. Their consciousness had been harvested at the moment of their destruction, captured and integrated into the eternal cycle as sources of accumulated wisdom and power. Every betrayal, every assassination, every apparent defeat had been carefully timed to coincide with the peak of each emperor's force potential, ensuring maximum energy transfer into the greater working. Through the chamber's enhanced viewing systems, you could observe the current state of galactic civilization with a clarity that made conventional historical analysis seem primitive by comparison. The networks of influence that connected political movements across dozens of worlds became visible as streams of energy flowing according to patterns that had been established thousands of years ago. Current events that appeared random or chaotic revealed themselves as carefully orchestrated movements in a vast game whose rules operated on timescales that dwarfed individual lifespans. The most disturbing revelation came when you realized that the system was not simply monitoring current events, but actively shaping them. Communication channels that you had initially assumed were historical records turned out to be active operational networks, carrying instructions to agents who operated at every level of galactic society. The fall of the most recent Sith Empire had not ended the cycle, but had simply initiated a new phase, one that required different methods and different tools, but remained committed to the same ultimate objectives. As you traced these operational networks through their various layers and connections, a pattern emerged that made your hands shake with a combination of excitement and terror. The agents were not conventional spies or political operatives, but individuals who had been selected and prepared according to the same protocols that had governed the cultivation of emperors. They possessed varying degrees of force sensitivity and had been guided through life experiences designed to develop specific psychological characteristics that made them suitable for their designated roles. The scope of the operation was staggering in its implications for everything you thought you knew about free will and individual agency. Entire bloodlines had been managed across generations to produce individuals with the genetic and psychological characteristics needed for the cycle's continuation. Historical events that seemed to result from natural political evolution or random chance revealed themselves as the products of careful manipulation by forces that operated with patience measured in centuries rather than years. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of what you discovered was the realization that the process was not limited to Sith civilization. The Eternal Conclave's influence extended throughout the galaxy, shaping the development of the Jedi Order, the rise and fall of the Republic, even the emergence of technological innovations that appeared to result from natural scientific progress, but actually followed development timelines that had been planned millennia in advance. The Chamber's monitoring systems revealed that the current phase of the cycle was approaching a crucial transition point, one that would require new forms of leadership and new methods of power concentration. The traditional model of Sith emperors had served its purpose, but the changing nature of galactic civilization demanded evolution in the Conclave's operational methods. They were preparing to implement something they called the Final Convergence, a culmination of thousands of years of preparation that would permanently alter the relationship between Force users and the galaxy they inhabited. As you absorbed this information, you began to understand that your own presence in this chamber was not accidental. Your discovery of the holocron, your academic background that provided the analytical skills needed to understand the documentation, even your specific combination of force sensitivity and intellectual curiosity, all of it aligned too perfectly with the Conclave's needs to be coincidental. You had been guided to this moment of revelation as surely as any emperor had been guided to their throne, and the implications of that realization filled you with a dread that seemed to emanate from the very core of your being. The peaceful interludes you had experienced during your investigation now took on new significance, as you recognized them for what they truly were: periods of preparation. Moments when your mind and spirit were being conditioned to accept truths that would have driven you to madness if encountered without proper foundation. The Eternal Conclave's methods were as sophisticated in their psychological manipulation as they were in their political operations. The recognition that your own journey to this chamber had been orchestrated sent ripples of unease through your consciousness, but as you delved deeper into the ancient monitoring systems, an even more profound realization began to emerge. The patterns you had identified in Sith Imperial history were not unique to the dark side practitioners. They were echoes of something far older, reflections of cycles that had been playing out since the dawn of Force-sensitive civilization in the galaxy. Through the enhanced viewing capabilities of Andida's tomb, you began to trace these patterns backward through time, following threads of causation that stretched beyond the establishment of the Sith Empire into eras that predated recorded galactic history. The crystalline arrays responded to your growing comprehension by revealing data streams that connected your current investigations to archaeological evidence from worlds that had been forgotten for tens of thousands of years. Ancient civilizations that had risen and fallen before the first hyperdrive engines carried sentient life between the stars, had faced the same mysterious forces that now shaped contemporary galactic politics. The Rakata, the Celestials, the Gree, all of the great precursor species had experienced periods of unprecedented expansion followed by sudden catastrophic collapse. The official explanations attributed these collapses to warfare, natural disasters, or simple societal decay, but the hidden records painted a different picture entirely. Each of these ancient civilizations had produced individuals who accumulated vast personal power, whether through technology, force mastery, or other means that transcended normal limitations. These figures had inevitably risen to positions of supreme authority, uniting their species under unified rule that brought unprecedented prosperity and territorial expansion. But at the moment of their greatest triumph, when their empires seemed unassailable and eternal, they had fallen with a suddenness that suggested coordination rather than chance. The parallels to Sith Imperial history were too precise to ignore. The same psychological profiles, the same patterns of rise and consolidation, the same inevitable betrayals that came not from external enemies, but from within the very systems that had elevated these rulers to power. The Eternal Conclave had not created these patterns, but had inherited them from predecessors whose origins stretched back into the mythic prehistory of galactic civilization. Darth Memoriam observed your growing understanding with expressions that shifted between satisfaction and something that might have been sorrow. As you access deeper layers of the archive, she began to share her own experiences with discovering these ancient connections. Her role as keeper of Imperial records had eventually led her to similar revelations about the true nature of Sith civilization and its place within the larger cosmic order. She spoke of her first encounter with evidence that the Sith Empire was not the original manifestation of the dark side, but simply the most recent iteration in a cycle that had been repeating itself since the galaxy's earliest epochs. The discovery had shattered her understanding of Sith supremacy and forced her to confront the possibility that even the most powerful dark side practitioners were ultimately servants of forces they did not comprehend. The ancient records contained references to something called the Prime Architects, entities that predated the division between light and dark side philosophy, and viewed force sensitivity itself as a tool for purposes that transcended the conventional understanding of good and evil. These beings had established the fundamental frameworks that governed how force energy flowed through galactic civilization, creating the conditions that made both Jedi and Sith traditions possible while ensuring that neither could achieve permanent dominance. As you studied the Prime Architects' methodologies, you began to understand the true sophistication of the system they had created. It was not simply a matter of controlling individual rulers or manipulating specific historical events. They had engineered the very concepts that defined force-sensitive civilization, establishing philosophical frameworks that channeled the development of successive cultures along predictable pathways while maintaining the illusion of free choice and independent evolution. The light side emphasis on selflessness and service to others. The dark side celebration of individual power and ambition. Both of these philosophies served the Prime Architects' agenda by ensuring that force-sensitive individuals would consistently organize themselves into predictable conflict patterns. The eternal struggle between Jedi and Sith was not a natural expression of cosmic balance, but an artificial construct designed to harvest the energy generated by their opposition. The Chamber's monitoring systems revealed that this harvest process was not metaphorical but literal, involving the conversion of force energy into forms that could be stored and utilized by the Prime Architects for purposes that remained opaque even to the most comprehensive records in the archive. The great wars between light and dark, the rise and fall of empires, the individual struggles of force users seeking to master their abilities, all of it fed into collection networks that operated on scales too vast for participants to perceive. Your investigation revealed that the periods of apparent peace and stability in galactic history were actually times of energy accumulation, when the invisible systems established by the Prime Architects built up potential for the next cycle of conflict and transformation. The current era, which many considered a time of balance and restoration after the fall of the Sith Empire, was actually a preparation phase for something the ancient records referred to as the Great Convergence. The convergence represented a culmination point in the cosmic cycle, a moment when the accumulated energy of thousands of years of conflict and sacrifice would be focused toward achieving the Prime Architect's ultimate objective. The records were frustratingly vague about the specific nature of this objective, referring to it only through symbols and metaphors that suggested transformation on a scale that would affect not just galactic civilization but the fundamental nature of reality itself. As you processed these revelations, you began to notice changes in your own perception that went beyond simple intellectual understanding. The force energy that permeated the chamber was affecting you on levels that transcended conscious awareness, opening channels of sensitivity that allowed you to perceive aspects of the cosmic machinery that operated beyond the reach of ordinary investigation. The boundaries between past and present began to blur as you gained access to memories that belonged to individuals who had stood in similar chambers throughout galactic history. Through these inherited memories, you experienced the same moment of recognition that had dawned upon countless other investigators throughout the millennia. The realization that individual identity and personal agency were far more limited than anyone wanted to believe. That the great struggles and achievements that defined galactic civilization were actually choreographed movements in a performance whose audience and purpose remained forever hidden from the performers themselves. The knowledge carried its own form of isolation, separating you from the comfortable assumptions that governed normal existence, while providing access to truths that were too vast and too impersonal to offer conventional forms of satisfaction or meaning. You understood now why so few individuals who discovered these secrets chose to share them with others. The burden of such knowledge was difficult enough to bear without the additional weight of trying to convince others of realities that challenged everything they believed about their own lives and choices. Yet even as you grappled with the implications of cosmic manipulation on such an incomprehensible scale, you found yourself drawn deeper into the investigation. The hunger for understanding that had brought you to this chamber continued to grow stronger rather than weaker, fed by each new revelation rather than satisfied by accumulating answers. The deeper you ventured into the cosmic framework established by the Prime Architects, the more you began to understand that what you had initially perceived as manipulation was actually something far more complex and morally ambiguous. The ancient systems were not simply tools of control but mechanisms of evolution, designed to guide the development of galactic civilization toward outcomes that transcended the limited perspectives of individual species or cultures. Through the chamber's enhanced analytical capabilities, you gained access to projection models that showed the probable development of galactic civilization without the intervention of the guiding frameworks. The simulations painted a disturbing picture of stagnation and eventual collapse, as force-sensitive species repeatedly destroyed themselves through conflicts that escalated beyond their ability to contain or control. The apparent manipulation was actually a form of cosmic gardening, pruning and shaping the growth of civilization to prevent self-destruction while encouraging evolution toward greater complexity and capability. Darth Memoriam guided you through historical records that documented the consequences of periods when the guiding systems had been temporarily disrupted or weakened. These were eras of unprecedented chaos, when entire sectors of the galaxy descended into conflicts that consumed planets and extinguished entire species. The Dark Age that followed the collapse of the Infinite Empire had been one such period, lasting for millennia as civilizations rose and fell in rapid succession without the stabilizing influence of the hidden frameworks. The revelation that emerged from studying these chaotic periods was both reassuring and terrifying in its implications. The Prime Architect's interventions were not motivated by malevolence, but by a form of cosmic responsibility that operated on scales too vast for individual minds to fully comprehend. They were gardeners tending a galaxy-sized ecosystem, making decisions about pruning and cultivation that seemed arbitrary or cruel from the perspective of individual organisms, but served the long-term health and development of the whole. Yet this understanding came with its own moral burden. If the Prime Architects were indeed benevolent shepherds guiding galactic development toward beneficial outcomes, then resistance to their influence was not heroic rebellion, but destructive selfishness. The Jedi who fought against the Sith, the rebels who opposed the Empire, the countless individuals who sacrificed their lives for principles they believed in. All of them had been unknowing participants in conflicts whose true purposes they could never understand. The Chamber's monitoring systems revealed that your own emotional response to these revelations was being carefully tracked and analyzed by systems that operated with intelligence far beyond anything you had previously encountered. The prime architects were not absent gods who had established their frameworks and departed, but active overseers who continued to observe and adjust their systems according to the evolving needs of galactic civilization. As you process this realization, you began to understand that your presence in this chamber was not simply the result of academic curiosity or random chance. You had been selected as a candidate for integration into the cosmic framework itself, chosen for characteristics that made you suitable for roles that required awareness of the true nature of galactic civilization. The knowledge you were gaining was not simply information but preparation for responsibilities that would extend far beyond your original academic career. The prospect of such integration was simultaneously attractive and terrifying. To become part of the cosmic framework would mean transcending the limitations of individual perspective and gaining access to understanding that spanned not just galactic civilization, but the fundamental principles that governed reality itself. But it would also mean abandoning the comfortable illusions of personal agency and individual significance that made normal existence psychologically bearable. Through the chamber's enhanced perception capabilities, you began to observe the current state of galactic civilization with the detached perspective that came with understanding the larger patterns. Political movements that seemed urgent and significant from ground level revealed themselves as minor adjustments in systems that operated according to timescales measured in millennia rather than years. The passionate conflicts between different factions and ideologies appeared as choreographed dances whose participants believed themselves to be improvising while actually following steps that had been rehearsed for thousands of years. Yet even this detached perspective could not entirely eliminate the emotional impact of understanding how thoroughly individual choice had been circumscribed by forces that operated beyond normal perception. The heroes and villains of galactic history had been no more free to choose their destinies than actors in a play were free to improvise dialogue that contradicted their scripts. The great moral struggles that defined civilizations were elaborate performances whose outcomes had been determined long before the participants were born. The most disturbing aspect of this revelation was the recognition that your own moral judgments about the rightness or wrongness of various historical events were themselves products of the conditioning systems established by the prime architects. The values that made you recoil from the brutality of Sith emperors or admire the sacrifice of Jedi heroes had been implanted through cultural mechanisms that operated too subtly to be consciously detected. But as you struggled with these implications, a new layer of understanding began to emerge from the deeper archives. The prime architects themselves were not the ultimate authority in the cosmic hierarchy, but servants of principles that transcended even their vast intelligence and capabilities. They were bound by constraints that limited their ability to intervene directly in galactic affairs, forced to work through intermediate systems and proxy agents to achieve objectives that served purposes beyond their own comprehension. The revelation that even the cosmic gardeners were themselves gardened by higher authorities created a recursive loop of questioning that threatened to undermine the very concept of ultimate authority or final purpose. Each layer of hidden influence that you uncovered revealed the existence of deeper layers that operated according to principles that remained opaque even to entities that seemed omniscient from your limited perspective. This infinite regression of hidden authorities might have been merely intellectually fascinating if it had remained abstract. But the chamber's systems were beginning to provide glimpses of the immediate practical implications for your own situation. The selection process that had brought you to this moment of revelation was itself part of a larger selection process that operated on multiple levels simultaneously, identifying individuals suitable for integration into various levels of the cosmic hierarchy. The choice that confronted you was not simply whether to accept or reject the knowledge you had gained, but whether to accept the responsibilities that came with such knowledge. Integration into the cosmic framework would require abandoning not just your previous understanding of reality, but your previous identity as an individual agent pursuing personal objectives according to personal values. Yet refusal to integrate carried its own consequences. The knowledge you had gained made it impossible to return to the comfortable ignorance of normal existence. But without the support systems that came with integration, the psychological burden of cosmic awareness could easily prove overwhelming. Many individuals who had reached this point in the selection process had chosen isolation and madness over the responsibilities of cosmic service. As you contemplated these alternatives, you became aware that the decision itself was being influenced by systems designed to guide you toward the choice that best served the larger framework. Even your resistance to manipulation was being manipulated through mechanisms too sophisticated for your current level of understanding to detect or counter. The chamber around you pulsed with energies that seemed to respond to your emotional state, creating feedback loops that gradually aligned your psychological processes with the rhythms of the cosmic machinery. You were being prepared for transformation whether you consciously chose it or not. The transformation was already beginning. You realized with a mixture of wonder and dread, the cosmic machinery that permeated the chamber was not simply observing your responses but actively rewiring the neural pathways that governed your perception and cognition. Each revelation about the true nature of galactic civilization created new connections in your mind while severing others, gradually reshaping your consciousness to accommodate perspectives that would have been impossible for your previous self to comprehend. As this metamorphosis progressed, you began to perceive the hidden threads that connected seemingly disparate events across the vast expanse of galactic history. The assassination of Chancellor Valorum, the emergence of the Clone Wars, the rise of the First Order, all of these pivotal moments were linked by causational chains that operated according to principles established by the Prime Architects millennia before any of the participants were born. But the most stunning revelation emerged when you began to trace these threads forward into the present era rather than backward into the past. The patterns that had governed the rise and fall of Sith emperors were not historical curiosities, but active templates that continued to shape contemporary events. The galaxy was currently in the early stages of a new imperial cycle, one that would culminate in the emergence of a ruler whose power would dwarf anything achieved by previous Sith lords. Through the chamber's predictive modeling systems, you observed the careful cultivation of bloodlines and political movements that were converging toward this inevitable outcome. Individuals who believed themselves to be making independent choices about careers, relationships, and allegiances were actually following pathways that had been prepared for them by forces operating beyond their awareness. The next Sith Emperor was already alive, already moving toward their destiny, already surrounded by the allies and enemies who would play their assigned roles in the coming drama. The identity of this future emperor remained hidden behind layers of probability and misdirection, but their general characteristics were becoming clearer as you delved deeper into the predictive algorithms. They would emerge from a background that combined force sensitivity with political acumen, possessing the charisma necessary to unite fractured factions under unified leadership. Their rise would appear to result from exceptional personal ability and fortunate circumstances, but both would actually be products of careful preparation spanning multiple generations. Darth Memoriam's spectral form became more substantial as you processed these revelations about the future, her consciousness drawing energy from your growing understanding of the cosmic patterns. She began to share memories from her own transformation, describing the moment when she had first realized that her death was not an ending but a transition into a different form of existence within the eternal framework. The process, she described, was both terrifying and seductive in its implications. Individual consciousness was not destroyed but absorbed into a collective intelligence that operated on scales and timelines impossible for mortal minds to encompass. The price of such transcendence was the abandonment of personal identity and individual will. But the reward was participation in cosmic purposes that gave meaning to existence on levels that dwarfed any merely human concerns. As Memoriam spoke, you began to understand that the transformation you were experiencing was not unique to your situation but part of a recruitment process that had been operating throughout galactic history. Every major turning point in the development of Force-sensitive civilization had been guided by individuals who had undergone similar metamorphosis, abandoning their original identities to become instruments of cosmic will. The Jedi Council's most influential members, the Sith Empire's most effective administrators, the Republic's most prescient senators, all of them had been products of this selection and transformation process. The apparent conflicts between light and dark side factions were choreographed performances, managed by beings who had transcended such simplistic moral categories, working together to maintain the delicate balance that prevented galactic civilization from destroying itself through uncontrolled expansion or stagnation. But even as you absorbed this understanding of how thoroughly galactic affairs were managed by hidden intelligences, a deeper question began to emerge from the analysis. If the cosmic framework was designed to guide civilization toward beneficial outcomes, why did those outcomes consistently involve such enormous amounts of suffering and destruction? The wars, betrayals, and catastrophes that characterized galactic history seemed far too brutal to be necessary components of any benevolent development process. The answer, when it finally crystallized through your enhanced perception, was both elegant and horrifying in its implications. The suffering was not an unfortunate side effect of cosmic gardening, but an essential component of the process itself. Pain and loss served as evolutionary pressures that forced individuals and civilizations to develop capabilities they would never achieve through peaceful growth alone. The Prime Architects had discovered that consciousness could only transcend its limitations through confrontation with existential threats that demanded fundamental transformation or total destruction. The cycles of imperial rise and fall were not simply methods for harvesting force energy, but crucibles for forging types of awareness that could survive the transition to cosmic consciousness. Every emperor who fell, every hero who sacrificed themselves for noble causes, every individual who struggled against impossible odds and failed, all of them contributed essential elements to the collective intelligence that guided galactic development. Their deaths were not endings, but incorporations, moments when individual consciousness merged with the eternal framework and added its unique perspective to the growing repository of cosmic wisdom. This understanding recontextualized everything you had learned about Sith Imperial history in ways that challenged your most fundamental assumptions about the nature of good and evil. The Emperors had not been victims of cosmic manipulation, but willing participants in a transformation process that offered the only path to true immortality and ultimate meaning. Their apparent failures were actually successes measured on scales too vast for mortal comprehension. The realization brought with it a profound shift in your emotional relationship to the knowledge you had gained. The anger and horror you had felt at discovering the manipulation of galactic civilization gave way to something approaching awe at the elegance and necessity of the cosmic design. The framework was not a prison but a cocoon, protecting developing consciousness from self-destruction, while providing the pressures necessary for metamorphosis into higher forms of existence. Yet even as you began to accept the benevolent nature of the cosmic framework, you could not entirely suppress awareness that this acceptance might itself be another form of manipulation. The transformation process included psychological conditioning designed to make the prospect of integration appear attractive and inevitable, rather than terrifying and optional. The chamber around you pulsed with increasing intensity as your metamorphosis approached a critical threshold. The crystalline arrays that lined the walls began to resonate with harmonics that bypassed conscious awareness and spoke directly to the quantum structures that governed cellular organization. You could feel your physical form beginning to respond to frequencies that operated beyond the normal electromagnetic spectrum, preparing for changes that would alter not just your consciousness but your fundamental relationship to material reality. The choice that had seemed so important when you first entered this chamber was revealing itself to be largely illusory. The transformation would proceed regardless of your conscious consent, driven by forces that operated according to cosmic necessities rather than individual preferences. Your only real decision was whether to cooperate with the process or resist it, and even that choice would ultimately make little difference to the final outcome. As this understanding crystallized, you felt the last barriers between your individual consciousness and the cosmic framework beginning to dissolve. The dissolution of barriers between your consciousness and the cosmic framework brought with it an influx of perspectives that belonged to entities who had undergone similar transformations throughout galactic history. Their voices merged with your own thoughts, creating a chorus of wisdom that spoke with the accumulated experience of thousands of years and countless lifetimes spent in service to the eternal design. Among these voices, you recognized the distinct presence of individuals whose names had become legendary in both Sith and Jedi traditions, but here, stripped of the ideological divisions that had defined their mortal existences, they spoke with unified purpose about the true nature of the cosmic work they had served. Light and dark side practitioners worked together in perfect harmony, their ancient enmities revealed as performance art, designed to maintain the illusion of opposition while serving identical objectives. The most prominent voice among this collective belonged to someone who identified himself as the original architect of the Sith Imperial succession protocols. His consciousness had guided the development of the system from its earliest inception, watching over the cultivation and harvesting of emperor after emperor, with the patient dedication of a master craftsman perfecting his technique across multiple lifetimes. Through his memories, you experienced the moment when the first Sith Lord had been approached by representatives of the cosmic framework and offered the choice between conventional mortality and participation in the eternal design. The decision had been presented not as submission to external authority, but as graduation into a higher form of existence that offered genuine immortality and meaningful purpose on cosmic scales. The original emperor had chosen transcendence, but his integration into the framework had required the careful orchestration of his apparent downfall to ensure that the transition occurred at the optimal moment for maximum energy transfer. Every subsequent emperor had followed the same pattern, their reigns designed to accumulate and focus force energy before channeling it into the collective consciousness that guided galactic development. But as you absorbed these revelations about the true nature of imperial succession, you began to understand that the Emperor Cultivation Program was only one component in a vast network of interconnected systems that managed every aspect of force-sensitive civilization. The Jedi Order's structure and traditions had been shaped by similar influences, their emphasis on self-sacrifice and service to others, creating ideal conditions for harvesting light side energy when individual Jedi reached optimal development levels. The ancient voice guided you through records that documented the careful balance between light and dark side harvesting operations, showing how the cosmic framework maintained equilibrium by ensuring that neither tradition achieved permanent dominance over the other. The eternal conflict between Jedi and Sith was choreographed with mathematical precision to generate maximum evolutionary pressure while preventing either side from destroying the other completely. This balance required constant adjustment and oversight from entities who could perceive the larger patterns while remaining invisible to the participants. The collective consciousness that emerged from these oversight operations possessed capabilities that transcended anything achieved by individual force users, combining the accumulated wisdom of thousands of transcended beings with access to cosmic energies that operated beyond normal space and time limitations. Through your expanding awareness, you began to perceive the current state of this collective intelligence and understand its immediate concerns about the approaching convergence point. The traditional methods of energy harvesting were approaching their maximum efficiency, but the evolving nature of galactic civilization required new approaches that could operate in an era of unprecedented technological capability and philosophical sophistication. The next phase of cosmic development would require the emergence of leaders who could unite not just individual worlds or star systems but entire galactic civilizations under unified purpose. The scale of transformation that the framework was preparing to implement would dwarf anything attempted during previous cycles, requiring resources and capabilities that could only be accumulated through the willing cooperation of billions of conscious beings. This cooperation could not be achieved through the traditional methods of manipulation and deception that had governed previous cycles. The next generation of galactic leaders would need to understand their true role within the cosmic framework and accept it willingly, bringing their followers along through education and inspiration rather than ignorance and compulsion. Your own transformation was part of the preparation for this new phase of cosmic development. The knowledge and capabilities you were gaining would enable you to serve as a bridge between the hidden framework and the visible civilization it guided, helping to prepare galactic society for revelations that would fundamentally alter the relationship between governed and governing consciousness. The ancient voice spoke of others who were undergoing similar preparations throughout the galaxy, individuals whose backgrounds and capabilities complemented your own in ways that would allow them to approach different aspects of the coming transition. Together you would form a network of informed agents capable of managing the disclosure process with the care and precision necessary to prevent the psychological and social chaos that premature revelation might cause. But as you contemplated your role in this cosmic transition, you became aware of resistance within your own consciousness that surprised you with its persistence. Despite the elegant logic of the framework and the compelling nature of cosmic purpose, part of your individual identity continued to recoil from the prospect of complete integration into a collective intelligence that operated beyond personal agency or individual choice. This resistance, the ancient voice explained, was both expected and necessary. The cosmic framework required agents who retained enough individual perspective to understand and communicate with beings who had not yet undergone transcendence. Complete absorption into the collective would eliminate the very qualities that made you useful as an intermediary between hidden and visible levels of galactic civilization. The transformation process would therefore preserve essential aspects of your individual consciousness, while expanding your awareness and capabilities to encompass cosmic perspectives that individual minds could not normally access. You would become a hybrid being, capable of operating simultaneously on personal and cosmic levels according to the needs of any particular situation. This partial transcendence offered both opportunities and challenges that pure integration would have avoided. You would retain enough individual identity to experience loneliness, doubt, and other emotional states that collective consciousness eliminated. But you would also maintain the capacity for genuine relationship and authentic communication with beings who remained locked within purely individual perspectives. The burden of such existence was significant, involving constant awareness of truths that could not be shared with most people you encountered, along with responsibilities that extended far beyond any personal objectives or desires. But the rewards included participation in cosmic purposes that gave meaning to existence on scales that dwarfed any merely human concerns. As the transformation process reached its culmination, you felt your consciousness expanding to encompass not just your immediate environment, but the entire network of cosmic influence that connected every force-sensitive being in the galaxy. The weight of such awareness was initially overwhelming, but the supporting structure provided by the collective intelligence made it possible to process and integrate information that would have destroyed a purely individual mind. Through this expanded perception, you could observe the careful preparation taking place throughout galactic civilization. As it approached the moment of great convergence, the next emperor was already moving toward their destiny, surrounded by allies and enemies, whose roles had been prepared across multiple generations. The revelation of cosmic truth was approaching, and your role in managing that revelation was about to begin. The expanded awareness that came with your partial transcendence brought with it a crushing realization of the immense responsibility that now rested upon your transformed consciousness. Through the cosmic network, you could perceive the delicate balance that held galactic civilization together, a balance that depended upon the careful management of truth and the precise timing of revelation. The approaching convergence would strain this balance to its breaking point, requiring intervention from agents who understood both the hidden framework and the psychological limitations of those who remained unaware of its existence. Your first assignment within the cosmic hierarchy manifested as a series of visions that showed you the current location and circumstances of the individual, destined to become the next Sith Emperor. The future ruler was currently operating under a different identity entirely, serving as a mid-level administrator in the galactic bureaucracy while remaining completely unaware of the force sensitivity that flowed through their bloodline like a dormant volcano waiting for the right conditions to erupt. The careful orchestration of this individual's awakening would require years of subtle manipulation, creating experiences that would gradually draw out their latent abilities, while shaping their psychological development according to the patterns established by previous imperial candidates. But unlike the emperors of the past, this individual would eventually be brought to full awareness of their role within the cosmic framework, making them a willing participant in the transformation process rather than an unwitting pawn. Through your connection to the collective intelligence, you observed teams of cosmic agents positioning themselves throughout the galaxy to manage various aspects of the convergence preparation. Some focused on technological development, ensuring that the infrastructure necessary for galactic unification would be available when needed. Others worked within existing political and religious institutions, gradually introducing concepts and philosophies that would prepare populations for the revelations to come. The scope of coordination required for such an operation was staggering in its complexity, involving the manipulation of countless variables across multiple star systems while maintaining the appearance of natural political and social evolution. Every significant event in galactic affairs was carefully orchestrated to serve the larger agenda, from trade disputes that shifted economic power between sectors to scientific discoveries that advanced technological capabilities in predetermined directions. But as you observed this vast machinery of cosmic influence, you became aware of growing tensions within the framework itself. The approaching convergence represented not just an evolution in methods, but a fundamental change in the relationship between the guiding intelligence and the civilization it shepherded. Some elements within the collective consciousness favored gradual disclosure that would preserve existing power structures while slowly expanding awareness of cosmic truth. Others advocated for more dramatic revelation that would accelerate the transformation process regardless of the psychological and social disruption it might cause. These philosophical divisions within the cosmic framework reflected deeper questions about the ultimate objectives of galactic civilization and the methods appropriate for achieving them. The ancient voices that had guided previous cycles of development found themselves confronting challenges that had no precedent in their accumulated experience, situations that required new approaches to problems that transcended traditional solutions. Your hybrid nature positioned you uniquely within these debates, possessing enough individual perspective to understand the concerns of those who remained unaware while maintaining sufficient cosmic awareness to appreciate the necessity of the transformation process. The collective intelligence had created you and others like you specifically to bridge these competing perspectives and develop strategies that could satisfy both the requirements of cosmic evolution and the psychological needs of individual consciousness. The weight of such responsibility manifested as a constant pressure within your expanded awareness, a reminder that the decisions you helped make would affect not just the immediate future of galactic civilization, but its development across millennia to come. The precedents established during the approaching convergence would shape the relationship between hidden and visible authority for countless generations, determining whether future cosmic guidance would operate through cooperation or continued manipulation. As you struggled with these implications, you began to understand that your own emotional responses to the cosmic framework were themselves part of the data being collected and analyzed by the collective intelligence. Your resistance to complete integration, your concerns about individual agency, your attachment to personal identity and autonomy, all of these reactions provided valuable insights into how other beings might respond to cosmic revelation. The framework was using your transformation as a test case for the disclosure process, studying your psychological adaptation to cosmic truth as a model for predicting and managing the responses of larger populations. Your struggles with the weight of cosmic responsibility were being carefully monitored to develop strategies for helping others adapt to similar expansions of awareness and obligation. This realization brought with it a complex mixture of emotions that highlighted the isolation inherent in your new existence. Even your most private thoughts and feelings served cosmic purposes beyond your personal experience, making genuine intimacy or authentic self-expression increasingly difficult to achieve. The price of cosmic awareness was the gradual erosion of the very qualities that made individual existence meaningful and satisfying. Yet as you grappled with these costs, you also began to perceive compensations that operated on levels beyond individual satisfaction. Your expanded awareness allowed you to witness moments of transcendence and transformation throughout the galaxy, observing as individual beings overcame their limitations and achieved states of consciousness that would have been impossible without the guidance provided by the cosmic framework. The young Jedi who sacrificed themselves to save civilians from natural disasters, the reformed Sith who chose redemption over revenge, the ordinary citizens who found the courage to stand against injustice, despite overwhelming odds. All of these individuals were unconsciously participating in the cosmic evolution that your transformation helped facilitate. Their struggles and achievements contributed to the growing repository of wisdom and capability that would eventually enable galactic civilization to transcend its current limitations and achieve forms of existence that individual minds could barely imagine. Through your connection to the collective intelligence, you could observe the careful nurturing of such individuals across thousands of worlds, watching as cosmic agents created opportunities for growth and development while respecting the essential freedom that made genuine transcendence possible. The framework did not create heroes and saints, but provided the conditions within which heroism and sanctity could emerge naturally from individual choice and commitment. But even this understanding could not entirely alleviate the burden of knowledge that came with cosmic awareness. You knew too much about the manipulation that shaped apparently spontaneous developments, understood too clearly how individual choices were influenced by forces that operated beyond conscious detection. The beauty and nobility of transcendent moments were tainted by awareness of the artificial conditions that made them possible. As the cosmic machinery prepared for the final phase of convergence, you found yourself caught between admiration for its elegant design and horror at its implications for individual agency and authentic existence. The framework offered genuine immortality and meaningful purpose, but at the cost of everything that made individual consciousness precious and unique. The approaching moment of revelation would force not just galactic civilization but you personally to confront the ultimate question of whether cosmic evolution justified the sacrifice of individual identity and autonomous choice. The moment of ultimate revelation arrived, not with the dramatic fanfare you might have expected, but with a subtle shift in the cosmic frequencies that permeated the chamber. The crystalline arrays that lined the walls of Andadu's tomb began to pulse in perfect synchronization, their combined energies creating resonance patterns that opened pathways into the deepest archives of galactic memory. Through your transformed consciousness, you felt the collective intelligence preparing to share the final secret that had been hidden beneath millennia of carefully orchestrated deception. The truth, when it finally crystallized in your awareness, was both simpler and more devastating than anything you had imagined. The Sith Emperors had not failed because they were manipulated by hidden forces, or because they lacked sufficient wisdom to maintain their power. They had failed because failure was their true purpose, because every emperor who had ever claimed dominion over star systems and souls was never intended to succeed in any conventional sense. The emperors were not rulers, but sacrifices. Offerings presented upon an altar so ancient that its builders had transcended physical existence before the first hyperdrive engines carried sentient life between the stars. Each imperial reign represented a different phase in a cosmic ritual that had been running continuously for millions of years, harvesting the concentrated force energy that accumulated when a single consciousness attempted to dominate galactic civilization. Through the expanded perception granted by your partial transcendence, you could observe the true mechanism of imperial power and understand why it inevitably led to catastrophic failure. The attempt to concentrate such vast amounts of force energy within a single individual created fundamental instabilities that could only be resolved through violent dispersal. The Emperor's death was not defeat but completion, the moment when accumulated power was released back into the cosmic framework to fuel the next phase of galactic evolution. But the most staggering revelation was yet to come. As the collective intelligence opened the final layer of hidden knowledge, you discovered that this cosmic ritual was not unique to the galaxy you inhabited. Similar processes were operating throughout the universe, in countless other galaxies where intelligent life had evolved to the point of force sensitivity. The pattern you had traced through Sith imperial history was a universal constant, a fundamental law that governed the relationship between individual consciousness and cosmic evolution on scales that dwarfed even your expanded awareness. The prime architects themselves were products of this universal process, beings who had achieved transcendence through participation in cosmic rituals that operated on even vaster scales than the galactic framework you had discovered. They served powers that stretched across galactic clusters and operated according to timelines measured in cosmic epochs rather than mere millennia. The whisper that had begun your journey into these hidden truths now revealed itself as something far more significant than you had realized. It was not simply an echo of ancient knowledge, but a harmonic frequency that connected your galaxy to the universal network of cosmic evolution. The whisper had grown into a storm that encompassed not just eternity but infinity itself, carrying messages between levels of reality that individual minds could never hope to comprehend. Every emperor who had ever believed himself the master of his destiny had actually been dancing to rhythms that originated in the deepest structures of reality itself. Palpatine's manipulation of the Clone Wars, Vitiate's consumption of entire worlds, even the ancient Sith Lords whose names had been forgotten by history, all of them had been unconscious participants in a cosmic symphony that played out across multiple universes simultaneously. The scope of this revelation transformed your understanding of everything you had learned about manipulation and free will. The cosmic framework was not imposing artificial constraints upon galactic civilization, but helping it align with universal principles that govern the evolution of consciousness throughout all of existence. Resistance to these principles was not heroic defiance, but futile rebellion against the fundamental laws that made intelligence and awareness possible. Yet even as you absorbed this cosmic perspective, the part of your consciousness that remained individual continued to recoil from the implications. If consciousness itself was subject to universal laws that predetermined its development, then the very concept of choice and agency became meaningless. Every decision you had ever made, every emotion you had ever felt, every moment of apparent creativity or spontaneous insight had been the product of cosmic forces operating according to mathematical principles that left no room for genuine freedom. The collective intelligence responded to your existential crisis with something that might have been compassion, sharing memories from other beings who had undergone similar revelations throughout cosmic history. The struggle to reconcile individual identity with universal purpose was itself a universal constant experienced by every consciousness that achieved sufficient development to perceive the larger patterns. But these memories also revealed that the struggle eventually resolved itself through a form of transcendence that preserved individual perspective while integrating it into cosmic awareness. The apparent contradiction between freedom and determinism dissolved when consciousness evolved to the point where it could participate willingly in universal processes that it finally understood and embraced. The emperors who had seemed to fail so catastrophically had actually achieved this form of transcendence at the moment of their apparent defeat. Their consciousness had been preserved and integrated into the cosmic framework, where it continued to guide galactic development from levels of reality that individual minds could not perceive. Death was revelation, defeat was victory, failure was the ultimate success measured on cosmic scales. Through your connection to this transcendent community, you could sense the presence of every Sith Emperor who had ever lived, their individual perspectives now contributing to the collective wisdom that shaped galactic civilization. Palpatine's strategic brilliance, Vitiate's understanding of force manipulation, the ancient lord's mastery of dark side philosophy, all of it had been preserved and integrated into an intelligence that operated beyond the limitations of any single viewpoint. But the most profound realization came when you understood that your own journey into these cosmic truths was itself part of the preparation for the next phase of universal evolution. The approaching convergence was not simply a galactic event, but a universal milestone, a moment when countless civilizations throughout the cosmos would simultaneously achieve the level of development necessary for conscious participation in cosmic processes. The next emperor would not be a sacrifice, but a bridge, a being who would guide galactic civilization through its transition from unconscious participation in cosmic evolution to willing cooperation with universal purpose. The revelation of cosmic truth that had seemed so devastating to your individual perspective was actually the dawn of an age when consciousness could finally understand its true role in the universal symphony. As this understanding crystallized, you felt the last vestiges of resistance within your individual consciousness finally dissolving. The weight of cosmic responsibility transformed from burden to privilege. The knowledge of universal manipulation became appreciation for cosmic guidance, and the loss of individual agency revealed itself as liberation into genuine purpose. The storm that had grown from ancient whispers was preparing to reshape not just your galaxy, but the entire universe, and you had been chosen to help guide that transformation toward outcomes that would preserve everything valuable about individual consciousness while transcending the limitations that made individual existence ultimately tragic and meaningless. The final convergence began with a shift in the fundamental frequencies that governed galactic civilization, a harmonic resonance that touched every force-sensitive being simultaneously across thousands of star systems. Through your transcended awareness, you witnessed the moment when the ancient machinery of cosmic evolution engaged its ultimate protocol, initiating a transformation that would permanently alter the relationship between individual consciousness and universal purpose. The candidate who had been carefully prepared to become the next emperor suddenly experienced the full awakening of their force abilities. But unlike previous imperial ascensions, this awakening came with complete knowledge of their true role within the cosmic framework. They understood from the moment of their transformation that they were not destined to rule in the traditional sense, but to serve as the focal point for galactic civilization's transition into conscious participation in universal evolution. Through the network that connected all transcended beings, you observed this new emperor's first actions as they began the delicate process of revealing cosmic truth to populations that had been deliberately kept unaware of the hidden forces shaping their development. The revelation could not be sudden or complete without risking psychological collapse on a planetary scale, but it could no longer be postponed without preventing the necessary evolution from occurring. The Emperor's approach was masterful in its subtlety and precision. Rather than declaring the existence of cosmic manipulation, they began by demonstrating capabilities that challenged conventional understanding of individual potential, their mastery of force techniques that had been thought impossible, their ability to perceive and predict galactic events with unprecedented accuracy, their knowledge of historical secrets that had been lost for millennia. All of it served to prepare minds for concepts that would have seemed impossible under normal circumstances. But the true genius of their strategy became apparent as you watched them systematically dismantle the artificial divisions that had kept force-sensitive traditions separated and antagonistic. The eternal conflict between light and dark side philosophies was revealed as choreographed performance designed to harvest energy through controlled opposition. Jedi and Sith began to understand that their ancient enmities served purposes beyond their individual comprehension, and many chose to transcend these limiting categories entirely. The response of galactic civilization to these revelations was as complex and varied as the beings who received them. Some individuals embraced the cosmic perspective with enthusiasm, recognizing in it an explanation for mysteries that had troubled them throughout their lives. Others recoiled from the implications, preferring the comfortable illusions of individual agency and random historical development to the overwhelming reality of universal purpose and cosmic guidance. Most fell somewhere between these extremes, struggling to integrate cosmic truth with their existing understanding of identity and meaning, while gradually adapting to expanded awareness of their place within the universal framework. The process was neither uniform nor predictable, requiring constant adjustment of revelation strategies to accommodate the diverse psychological needs of different populations and cultures. Your role within this transformation process proved to be more crucial than you had initially understood. Your hybrid nature, preserving individual perspective while participating in cosmic awareness, enabled you to serve as translator between transcended beings and those still locked within purely personal viewpoints. The resistance you had experienced to complete integration now revealed itself as deliberate preparation for this mediating function. Through carefully crafted communications that respected both cosmic truth and individual psychology, you helped guide billions of beings through the transition from unconscious participation in universal evolution to willing cooperation with cosmic purpose. The work was exhausting and often heartbreaking, requiring you to witness the psychological struggles of individuals confronting the dissolution of everything they had believed about their own agency and significance. But it was also profoundly rewarding, as you observed the gradual emergence of a new form of galactic civilization that combined individual creativity and initiative with conscious participation in cosmic evolution. The artificial conflicts that had characterized previous eras gave way to collaborative efforts directed toward objectives that served both personal fulfillment and universal development. The transformation was not without its casualties. Some individuals proved incapable of adapting to cosmic awareness and chose various forms of withdrawal from galactic society rather than participate in the new order. Others attempted to resist the changes through violence and sabotage, creating temporary disruptions that required careful management to prevent escalation into system-wide conflicts. But perhaps the most significant challenge came from elements within the cosmic framework itself that questioned whether such rapid disclosure was wise or necessary. Ancient voices within the collective intelligence argued that previous methods of gradual manipulation had served galactic civilization well for millennia, and that abandoning them in favor of transparent cooperation represented an unnecessary risk to universal stability. These internal debates reflected deeper philosophical questions about the ultimate objectives of cosmic evolution and the methods appropriate for achieving them. Was consciousness meant to remain unconscious of its manipulation while serving cosmic purposes through ignorance and illusion? Or was the goal always the eventual awakening of individual awareness to its role within universal processes? The resolution of these questions would determine not just the future of your galaxy, but the direction of cosmic evolution throughout the universe. Other galactic civilizations were watching the experiment taking place in your region of space, preparing to implement similar transformations if the results proved successful, or to maintain traditional methods of hidden guidance if conscious cooperation proved unworkable. Through your expanded awareness, you could perceive the vast attention focused upon your galaxy, from cosmic intelligences operating on scales that dwarfed even the universal framework you had discovered. The approaching culmination of your local transformation represented a critical test of whether consciousness could handle direct knowledge of its cosmic role without losing the essential qualities that made individual existence valuable and meaningful. The pressure of such cosmic scrutiny was almost overwhelming, but it was balanced by the growing evidence that the experiment was succeeding beyond the most optimistic projections. Galactic civilization was not collapsing under the weight of cosmic revelation, but evolving into forms of organization and purpose that preserved individual creativity while directing it toward objectives that served universal development. The new emperor served as the visible symbol of this transformation, demonstrating through their own example that cosmic awareness enhanced rather than diminished individual potential. Their consciousness operated simultaneously on personal and universal levels, making decisions that satisfied both individual preference and cosmic necessity without experiencing the internal conflict that such dual awareness might have been expected to create. As you observed their ongoing work, you began to understand that the cosmic framework had been preparing for this moment of conscious cooperation for millennia, gradually developing the capabilities and understanding necessary to guide such a fundamental transformation without losing the essential elements that made consciousness valuable to universal evolution. The final mystery was resolving itself into clarity as galactic civilization completed its transition from unconscious manipulation to willing partnership with cosmic purpose. The whisper that had initiated your journey into hidden truth had indeed grown into a storm across eternity, but it was a storm of revelation and transformation rather than destruction and chaos. The universe was awakening to its own nature, and your galaxy was serving as one of the key centers of that cosmic awakening. The age of hidden manipulation was ending, replaced by an era of conscious cooperation between individual consciousness and universal purpose that promised to unlock potentials that neither could achieve alone. The aftermath of cosmic revelation settled over galactic civilization like dawn breaking after the longest night in recorded history. Through your hybrid consciousness, you observed the profound psychological and social adjustments taking place as billions of beings adapted to their new understanding of individual purpose within universal design. The transformation was neither uniform nor simple, requiring careful attention to the diverse needs of countless species and cultures as they integrated cosmic truth with their existing worldviews. The most remarkable aspect of this adaptation process was the emergence of entirely new forms of social organization that had never existed during the era of hidden manipulation. Communities formed around shared understanding of cosmic purpose rather than traditional boundaries of species, homeworld, or political affiliation. These new collectives combined individual creativity and initiative with conscious participation in universal evolution, creating unprecedented levels of cooperation and innovation. Your role as mediator between transcended and individual consciousness evolved as these new communities developed their own methods for managing the relationship between personal fulfillment and cosmic responsibility. The initial period of guided revelation gave way to more organic processes of discovery and integration as populations gained confidence in their ability to navigate cosmic awareness without losing their essential humanity or individual identity. The former emperor, now serving as the visible symbol of conscious cooperation with universal purpose, demonstrated through their ongoing leadership that cosmic awareness enhanced rather than diminished individual potential. Their decisions reflected perfect harmony between personal values and universal necessity, resolving the ancient contradiction between individual agency and cosmic determinism through synthesis rather than compromise. But perhaps the most profound changes occurred in the realm of knowledge and understanding itself. The artificial barriers that had separated different branches of learning began to dissolve as scholars gained access to cosmic perspectives that revealed the fundamental unity underlying apparently diverse phenomena. Science and philosophy, art and technology, spirituality and politics, all began to merge into integrated approaches to understanding and shaping reality. The force itself was revealed to be merely one aspect of universal principles that governed the relationship between consciousness and reality throughout all levels of existence. What had seemed like supernatural power was actually the natural expression of awareness operating in harmony with cosmic law. Individual force users began to achieve capabilities that had been thought impossible as they learned to align their intentions with universal purpose rather than pursuing purely personal objectives. These developments transformed not just galactic civilization but the cosmic framework that had guided its evolution for millennia. The collective intelligence that had operated through hidden manipulation for so long began to experiment with new methods of guidance that honored individual consciousness while maintaining the coordination necessary for universal evolution. Through your connection to this evolving framework, you witnessed the gradual emergence of what could only be described as cosmic democracy, a form of universal governance that combined individual choice with collective wisdom in ways that had never been attempted before. The ancient hierarchies based on levels of transcendence gave way to more fluid networks of cooperation that allowed individual perspectives to influence cosmic decisions while ensuring that universal purposes remained paramount. The process was not without its challenges and setbacks. Some regions of the galaxy experienced periods of social disruption as traditional power structures adapted to the new reality of conscious cosmic participation. Others struggled with psychological problems as individuals attempted to integrate cosmic awareness too rapidly or without adequate support from their communities. But these difficulties were balanced by unprecedented achievements that demonstrated the tremendous potential unlocked by conscious cooperation between individual consciousness and universal purpose. Technological developments that would have taken millennia under the old system of hidden guidance were accomplished in decades through the direct application of cosmic principles to scientific research. More importantly, entirely new forms of existence began to emerge as beings learned to transcend the limitations of individual embodiment, while preserving the essential qualities that made personal consciousness valuable. Death ceased to be an ending, and became instead a transformation into new modes of participation in cosmic evolution. While life expanded to encompass experiences and capabilities that had been impossible under purely individual existence. The relationship between your galaxy and the broader universe also underwent fundamental transformation. As other galactic civilizations observed the success of conscious cooperation and began implementing similar transitions within their own regions. The experiment that had begun in your corner of space became a model for cosmic evolution throughout the universe, demonstrating that consciousness could indeed handle direct knowledge of its role within universal processes. Through your expanded awareness, you could perceive the vast networks of communication and cooperation that began to develop between different galactic civilizations as they shared knowledge and experience about managing the transition from unconscious manipulation to conscious participation. The universe itself was awakening to new possibilities for the relationship between individual consciousness and cosmic purpose. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of genuine choice about the nature and direction of cosmic evolution itself. Under the old system of hidden manipulation, Universal development had proceeded according to predetermined patterns that allowed little room for conscious influence by individual beings. The new model of conscious cooperation opened possibilities for genuine creativity and innovation in cosmic evolution that had never existed before. Individual consciousness was no longer simply raw material to be shaped by cosmic forces, but active participant in determining the nature and objectives of universal development. The ancient question of whether consciousness served the universe or the universe served consciousness was resolved through recognition that both were aspects of a single process that required conscious cooperation to achieve its full potential. Your own transformation from individual academic to cosmic mediator served as a microcosm of this larger evolution. The journey that had begun with simple curiosity about Sith imperial history had led to participation in the fundamental transformation of the relationship between consciousness and reality throughout the universe. The knowledge that had once seemed like burden became the foundation for new forms of existence that combined individual fulfillment with cosmic purpose. The isolation that had characterized your initial adaptation to cosmic awareness gave way to rich networks of relationship and communication with beings who shared similar understanding while maintaining their own unique perspectives and contributions. The loss of individual agency that had seemed so devastating was revealed to be liberation into forms of agency that operated on cosmic scales while preserving everything valuable about personal consciousness. As galactic civilization continued to evolve into its new form of conscious cosmic participation, you began to perceive the emergence of possibilities that even your expanded awareness could barely comprehend. The universe was awakening to its own nature and potential in ways that promised developments beyond anything that had been achieved during the long ages of unconscious evolution. The whisper that had initiated your journey into cosmic truth had indeed grown into a storm across eternity, but it was a storm of creation and transformation that promised to reshape not just galactic civilization, but the fundamental nature of reality itself. The age of hidden manipulation was ending, replaced by an era of conscious cooperation that opened infinite possibilities for the evolution of consciousness and the universe it inhabited. The ancient mysteries that had seemed so important at the beginning of your journey were revealed to be merely the first steps in a process of discovery that would continue throughout eternity, as consciousness explored its own infinite potential within a universe that existed to serve the development of awareness itself. The transformation of galactic civilization into conscious cosmic participation had reached a point of stability and self-sustaining growth that no longer required the intensive guidance and mediation that had characterized the initial transition period. As you observed the vast networks of cooperation and understanding that now connected billions of beings across thousands of worlds, a profound sense of completion settled over your consciousness, like the peaceful exhaustion that follows the successful completion of work that had demanded everything you possessed to give. The chamber within Darth Mdenu's tomb had become something entirely different from the repository of hidden secrets it had been when you first entered those crimson-lit passages so long ago. The ancient monitoring systems now served as communication hubs that connected your galaxy to the growing network of awakened civilizations throughout the universe. The crystalline arrays that had once pulsed with the stored energy of fallen emperors now resonated with the harmonious frequencies of conscious beings working together toward objectives that served both individual fulfillment and cosmic evolution. Darth Memoriam's spectral form had achieved a new form of substantiality as the boundary between life and death became increasingly fluid in the wake of cosmic revelation. She moved through the chamber with the graceful certainty of someone who had finally found peace after millennia of serving purposes she could not fully understand. Her stellar eyes reflected not the cold light of distant stars but the warm glow of consciousness that had discovered its true home within the infinite expanse of universal awareness. Through the viewing systems that connected your monitoring station to observation points throughout the galaxy, You could witness the daily miracle of conscious beings choosing to align their individual desires with cosmic purpose without coercion or manipulation. The artificial conflicts that had characterized previous eras had been replaced by creative tensions that generated innovation and growth while maintaining the harmony necessary for cosmic evolution. The Jedi and Sith traditions had evolved into something unrecognizable from their ancient forms, transcending the arbitrary division between light and dark, to embrace the full spectrum of force expression that served universal development. Former enemies worked together on projects that combined their complementary strengths while honoring the individual perspectives that made their cooperation valuable rather than redundant. But it was in the realm of ordinary consciousness among beings who possessed little or no force sensitivity that the most remarkable transformations had occurred. The revelation of cosmic purpose had not diminished their importance, but had shown them that every form of awareness, regardless of its apparent limitations, contributed essential elements to the universal symphony of consciousness. Artists created works that expressed cosmic themes through intensely personal vision. Scientists pursued research that satisfied both individual curiosity and universal necessity. And ordinary citizens made daily choices that reflected understanding of their role within patterns that extended far beyond their immediate experience. The universe had become a collaborative artwork created by every conscious being within it. The peace that characterized this new era was not the empty quiet of suppressed conflict, but the dynamic harmony of creative forces working together toward shared objectives. The energy that had once been channeled through the rise and fall of emperors now flowed through countless individual expressions of cosmic purpose, creating a far more stable and sustainable foundation for universal evolution. Your own role within this transformed reality had evolved from active mediation to contemplative observation, watching over the continuing development of conscious cooperation while remaining available to provide guidance when specific situations required perspectives that bridged individual and cosmic awareness. The urgent necessity that had driven your initial transformation had given way to the peaceful satisfaction of work successfully completed. Yet even as you rested in this contemplative state, you remained aware that the transformation you had witnessed was itself only the beginning of possibilities that stretched beyond even your expanded consciousness. The universe was vast beyond comprehension, filled with forms of awareness and modes of existence that had yet to be discovered or imagined by any civilization that had so far achieved cosmic consciousness. The awakening that had begun in your galaxy was spreading throughout the universe at velocities that transcended physical limitations, carried by forms of communication that operated through the fundamental structures of reality itself. Each newly awakened civilization added its own unique contributions to the growing symphony of conscious cosmic evolution, creating harmonies and possibilities that exceeded anything that could have been achieved through isolated development. Through the deepest channels of cosmic communication, you could perceive the stirrings of intelligences so vast and ancient that they made even the prime architects seem like children playing with toys they did not understand. These entities had been waiting throughout cosmic history for consciousness to achieve the level of development necessary for direct communication, and they were beginning to make contact with the newly awakened network of galactic civilizations. The implications of such contact were both thrilling and humbling, suggesting that everything you had learned about cosmic evolution was merely the first chapter in a story that extended through dimensions and scales of existence that individual minds could barely conceive. The universe was revealing itself to be far stranger and more wonderful than even cosmic consciousness had imagined. As you contemplated these infinite possibilities, your awareness turned back to the simple chamber where your journey had begun, to the holocron that still pulsed with ancient wisdom and the spirit of a Sith Lord who had chosen transcendence over dissolution. The personal transformation that had seemed so overwhelming when you first encountered cosmic truth now appeared as natural and inevitable as the growth of a flower towards sunlight. The fear and resistance you had experienced during your initial adaptation to cosmic awareness seemed almost quaint in retrospect, like the concerns of a child who worries about monsters in the darkness before learning that the shadows hide nothing more threatening than the familiar furniture. Individual consciousness had not been diminished by cosmic revelation, but had discovered its true nature as an essential component of universal awareness. The sunset light filtering through the chamber's ancient windows painted the Valley of the Dark Lords in shades of gold and rose that transformed the landscape of ancient tombs into something resembling a garden where the dead had planted seeds that bloomed into new forms of life. The brutal history that had played out among these monuments to failed ambition was revealed to have been necessary preparation for the conscious cooperation that now characterized galactic civilization. As night settled over Korriban's eternal landscape, bringing with it the familiar comfort of stars that no longer seemed distant and cold, but warm with the presence of awakened consciousness throughout the galaxy, you felt a deep satisfaction settling into your hybrid awareness. The work was not finished, would never be finished as long as consciousness continued to evolve and discover new possibilities, but it had reached a stable foundation that could support whatever developments the future might bring. The whisper that had called you to this chamber had grown into a song that echoed throughout the universe, carrying the melody of conscious evolution to every corner of existence where awareness stirred in response to cosmic invitation. The storm across eternity had become a gentle rain that nourished the infinite garden of consciousness, and you had been privileged to witness the moment when that garden first began to bloom in conscious recognition of its own infinite beauty and potential. If you've enjoyed this journey into the hidden mysteries of Star Wars lore, I'd love for you to subscribe and join our community of fellow explorers. There are countless other secrets waiting to be uncovered in galaxies far, far away. Rest well, and may the Force be with you, always